In May 1945, the 2nd Battalion of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, the famous Band of Brothers, would finish their war here in Kaprun, Austria. In this episode of World War II Wayfinder, I'm going to look at some of the famous photos that were taken here in the summer of 1945 and try and find the then and now locations to match them up. I'll also look at the dispositions of the 506 in and around the area of Kaprun and Zelamzee and why they were here in 1945. So the first image that I want to look at here from Kaprun is probably the most famous one. It was of Easy Company at the end of the war, so realistically this is going to be taken in the summertime, so well after May the 8th, and it's of the company as it stood at that point in the summer of 1945 before they started being filtered off to the 501st or sent to other units or sent back to the US if they'd made enough points throughout the course of their service during the war. And sadly, trying to find the exact location is exceptionally difficult. There's numerous spots in and around the area by the castle of Kaprun where it could be, but one thing we've got to remember is this area has undergone so much redevelopment in the past 79 years. Now there are a couple of key features in the photo. It does show some houses behind the men, but it's very difficult to try and ascertain exactly where it was taken. If I just bring the camera around, when JD from the History Underground visited, he pointed out that it may well be this field behind, and it certainly could be. There's nothing to say that it isn't, other than the absence of those two houses. But again, after 79 years, and one thing I've learned in my time here living in Europe is a lot more than, say, the UK, which I'm very familiar with. These houses get pulled down and rebuilt, and they're all rebuilt in a very traditional Bavarian, or traditional Austrian style, I should say. But so they look old, but they're actually not. So they're in completely new footprints in terms of where those houses actually are. So it's quite possible that it was the field behind where their final assembly photo was taken. It certainly makes sense with the castle of Kaprun being right next to it. It's just hard to tell, but I'll show you the image, and on this one certainly you can make your own mind up whether it is this spot or whether you think it might be somewhere else here in Kaprun. Now this is the famous image in question. I'm sure that if you're watching this channel you have no doubt seen this image before, and we can see from it, okay, yeah, there are roofs in the background and the ground slopes up steeply as it does here, although now it is covered with dense amounts of trees, and these forests are all farmed at various points throughout the year as they sustain the houses around here with firewood, etc., and natural building materials. But it's possible that the company could have been here in this field. If I just bring the camera around again, you can see how close the castle is to it. But sadly there is no way to be 100% sure it was taken in this spot. But rest assured, the remaining 3 images from here in Kaprun, I have found the approximate locations, and you can definitely see the distinguishing features in the background, so we're able to line them up properly. So let's go and take a walk through the village and see if we can find the rest of them. One aspect that you may not have known about Kaprun is throughout this region in Austria, Hermann Göring tried to have many hydroelectric plants constructed from around 1938. I think the project obviously came to a very swift end in 1945. But here in Kaprun, there is a mass grave to 87 Soviet prisoners of war who died as forced laborers here on one of these projects. And there is a Soviet Friedhof here, a Soviet war cemetery to them here in Kaprun. Now, for those of you that don't speak Russian or German, I'll read what the translation is, or what the inscription is, on the marble behind there. It says, Here lie 87 Soviet citizens driven into misery by German fascist conquerors and who died far from home. And I think it's quite a striking memorial, especially to see the Soviet star of the former USSR there on top of this memorial when it's overlooking such a gorgeous valley. It to me personally seems a little bit out of place, but yeah, quite an interesting piece here in Kaprun to see, aside from the Easy Company, the Band of Brothers aspect that this place is so well known for. Now, from the Soviet memorial, we will go into Kaprun itself and try and find the remaining then and now photos for this episode. So this whole area around Zell am See, Kaprun, Saalbach, Saalfelden, this whole area was important to the Americans at the end of the Second World War, or just slightly after hostilities had ceased, with a lot of high-ranking Nazis and Waffen-SS members that were wanted as part of the war crimes investigations post-war. Obviously, some of those were trying to escape, and it was the job of the 3rd and 7th US armies to put in roadblocks to ensure that they couldn't move further south and escape into the mountains and then to go outside of Europe and outside of the Americans' control. So the 101st were tasked with coming to this area to put in those roadblocks and to try and pick up those who were wanted by the Allies, and also to ensure that the rest of the German units moving through here as part of the surrender and that disarmament process was happening according to plan. Obviously, martial law was in place at this point, so the Americans were in control of this area and they were governing it at the time. Now, if you've seen one of my earlier videos, you'll have seen the Grand Hotel on Lake Zell am See, and that was where Colonel Sink set up regimental headquarters for the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment. It's where we see Winters taking his morning swims in episode 10 of Band of Brothers, and I personally think from the series they did a fantastic job of capturing the essence of that time of the war, that belief that actually, yes, we may get to go home, we may get to go and see our families and restart our lives and properly take on the things that we wanted to do. You know, I think it really captures that essence there, and the actors in it portrayed it wonderfully. And when you look at the area around here, you get a real sense of why those soldiers would have felt that sense of elation. Yeah, they were still having to pull guard duty, they were still having to train, they were still doing jumps to retain their currency, which I'm sure they probably actually enjoyed, especially on the 4th of July jump where they landed in the lake as part of the 4th of July celebrations in 1945, which I just think is really cool. But this whole area was 101st Country, and specifically Kaprun belonged to 2nd Battalion. 3rd Battalion was further up toward Zell am See, and 1st Battalion was again in this local area. But here in Kaprun, it belonged to 2nd Battalion and Major Richard Winters. And to be able to walk this area, walk the ground here, and to see the same views that those men, all of those very famous men from Stephen Ambrose's book, Band of Brothers, you know, those names that are so familiar with us today in 2024, to be here and to see roughly the same views that those men would have seen back in 1945 is really quite something. Another interesting point about this geographical location with Kaprun is the ridgeline here behind me. Basically from there heading south goes to the Grossglockner and the access roads beyond the mountain range that it sits on, that Grossglockner being a massive glacier. Now in April, May 1945 there had been so much snow that all the roads that the Germans could have used to keep retreating from this area, from the Americans who were advancing, were completely blocked. So they had no way of getting further south. So with all of the banter we see in episode 10 given to O'Keefe and the other replacements about the Alpine Redoubt and the SS being here, and how Berconte saying, yeah, they're crazy, you know, they would have ended up, had they have actually had that Alpine Redoubt, it would have been in and around this area. Not only because defensively with the mountains this is an exceptional place to defend, but also because there were no further roads south for the Germans to retreat through. So from the grounds of the castle and the approximate location where the last assembly photo of Easy Company may or may not have been taken, over the valley there, in that direction, is the spot of two wonderful photos of Major Richard Winters and Harry Welsh. And it's brilliant because we can see the United States flag getting taken out, ready for one of the many parades that would have happened here in the summer of 1945. Now, I know it's roughly this spot because the hill line there, just above my head, behind me in the image, is visible in these photos. And I'll turn the camera around so you can get a proper look at that hillside now. But there's a couple of distinctive features on there that appear in the wartime photos taken in 1945. So that's the ridgeline itself. There's a helicopter flying just above it, and there's all these power lines in the way now. And unfortunately, we do have rather a lot of cloud that's coming over. That's just unfortunately the weather that we're experiencing here today. If I pan the camera around, you can see just how changeable the weather has been, and we've dodged a load of rain this morning. But that ridgeline that's in the center of the shot there appears in these photos. And that's the first one there. We can see two guys unfurling the colors there. The flag of the United States of America is being brought out from its protective container. And there's Major Winters there, stood facing Harry Welsh, who has the bandage over his right eye. I'm not sure who the officer is in the middle. If anybody does know, please let me know in the comments. But approximately, that's the then and now comparison from 1945 to 2024. Now, fortunately, the weather's improving a little bit, and this is the second image. I'll just bring it closer to the camera. So there we can see Major Winters stood at parade rest along with Harry Welsh, with the colours unfurled and an enlisted man holding it. Now, what's interesting by this stage in the war is they're wearing the very popular and the issued Ike jacket. That is the cut-down tunic that was made popular by General Eisenhower himself, but still wearing the officers' pinks trousers with the pinks shirts, and it's a little bit hard to see because the grass is quite long in the meadow that they were standing, but you can see they're wearing their distinctive paratrooper jump boots along with their garrison caps. And as the cloud sort of eases from there, we can tell that, again, taken in the same spot, obviously, as the first photo, but very clearly that ridge line there over the valley from Kaprun itself. Now, unfortunately, a lot of modern redevelopments happened. The big building there in the center of the shot, that's now a big swimming pool and spa area. And we've got all these power lines that course through the valley, distributing electricity to all the different villages and towns that are along here. But very much, this is the location, or the approximate location, of where these famous images were taken in the summer of 1945. So from here, we will just head further into the village to look at the last then and now photo from Kaprun. And it's a great one that shows Major Winters with his men of 2nd Platoon of Easy Company. So this area here is almost in the heart of Kaprun village itself, and it was here that a very famous photo of 2nd Platoon from Easy Company of the 506 was taken, and I believe it to be roughly this spot. Now what you've got to remember is in the past 79 years, Kaprun has become a really popular ski resort, so you can see there's a lot of modern development, and the road that I'm on, I don't know if you can see behind me, there's a lot of agricultural vehicles coming past. There's also a lot of goods vehicles and such moving around here. But it was roughly this spot where that, or one of the famous photos that was taken here in Kaprun was taken, and you can see Major Winters as he was at this point in the war, where he stood with his men when he was formerly the commander of 2nd Platoon in Easy Company, and it's a great image. So this is the view today. Now unfortunately the weather's been really hit and miss with clouds and rain, but it has brightened up for a little bit, and you can see there's some really distinctive peaks in the background. If I line that up, we can see on the left hand side of the image there's that sharp slope, and then there's some other peaks as well, and we can see that they all correspond to this view. So as I say, trying to match this exactly, given the amount of redevelopment that Kaprun has undergone in the past 79 years, is quite tricky, but roughly from this spot the photo does line up, and it does appear to be the spot where 2nd Platoon stood for this famous photograph taken here in the summer of 1945. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode looking at Easy Company of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment and their time here in Kaprun in the summer of 1945. I hope it's given you some insight into what you see in episode 10 of Band of Brothers, and to give you an understanding of where those incredible wartime photos were taken of Major Winters and Easy Company. If you have enjoyed it, please hit that like button, comment if you want to, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel because it makes a big difference. Okay, I will see you all in the next one.